Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, The Analytics Era, a look at the future of metrics. I'm Megan Selva, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we get started. If you experience any difficulty with the webinar itself, you can get help by clicking on the yellow question mark icon at the bottom of your screen. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webcast. Click on the red Q&A button and just type your question into the Ask a Question text area to the right of the presentation window, and then click the Submit button. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. To chat with others who are attending today, click on the Group Chat button at the bottom right of your screen. We love having you exchange ideas during the webinar, so please feel free to chat. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the green folder icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you experience any technical problems, please type your issue into the Q&A text area and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand starting at this time tomorrow, and you'll receive an email reminder to let you know it's available. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on hdiconnect.com, where you can read a blog, ask a question, or find a solution. Joining us today to discuss our topic is John Custy. John Custy is a services management authority with extensive experience helping organizations improve their services delivery, become more strategic, and increase value. He's an internationally known speaker and educator who challenges us to think differently. John received his MA from Boston University and his BS from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. In addition, he's earned his IDLE Manager, IDLE Expert, ISO 20000 Consultant, KCS Consultant, and Kepner-Trigo certifications. He's also a member of the HDI faculty and the HDI International Certification Standards Committee. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome everyone to our session today on analytics. So to begin, I just want to talk about what we're going to cover in the next 45, 50 minutes. And then, of course, we'll have some time for questions. But I want to start by beginning and talking a little bit about big data, what is big data, and really talk about analytics, which is really moving us beyond the reporting that we do today and really getting us to understand and obtain better insights about what's going on, so we can better enable the business to be more successful. And that's really what we want to talk about and where we want to go. And so let's begin. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the concept of big data. Some of your organizations are starting to use it, probably in a marketing and sales area. And we've got other terms like business intelligence. We've got all of the analytics. And not very often is it being used in IT, yet we know that the IT services that all of you support, either design, support, maintain, are really key enablers for your business. Now, it really doesn't make any difference whether it's internal customers or external customers, but these services we are using to enable the business to be successful. So it's important that we understand what some of these things are. And one of the key things we've got is we need to have metrics. And when we talk about metrics, quite often we can categorize them in a couple of ways. We can talk about process metrics, and when we do, we talk about first how the efficiency of metrics, right? How many and how fast. And then as we mature a bit, we might get to the effectiveness. Are we doing it correctly the first time? And we might talk some about progress, how well are we maturing? And we're going to talk about compliance, how many people are really adhering to what we want to do. And if we're not careful, obviously it can become quite bureaucratic, but processes are really core to enabling any service organization to deliver good quality, high quality services. And because those processes are there to enable consistency, enable quality, enable for us to understand what it costs to deliver that quality of service. We also have, as we know, we have some service metrics where we typically want to talk about end-to-end on a service. and we can talk about technology metrics. How well is the technology performing? And so those are some of the operational metrics. We also want to talk about things like baselines. Where are we? Right? And we want to know where we begin because we want to be able to trend any changes. Or sometimes we want to be able to look back and say, how far have we come? We can have all of those in there, and a lot of these, again, are used internally. Our customers primarily care about outcomes, so we need to make sure we're talking about outcomes and we have outcome metrics there. We're going to have some diagnostics, all right? Impacts of what we do, whether it's a change, it's a release, it's a change in a process, it's an update of software, it's new devices, new services. We really want to understand what's the impact of that on sales, what's the impact of that on customer satisfaction, customer retention, customer loyalty, employee engagement. So those are some things we might want to look at. We might want to look at overall health of the system. We may want to look at the behaviors. And all of these are important things to measure. However, for most of us, we're unable to measure a lot of these because the data resides in many disparate databases. And the tools that most of us have today are basic spreadsheets. And so the ability or the cost to bring all of it together is just so expensive or so time-consuming, or we don't have tools to even analyze it, that we can't quite get there. So what we want to do is talk a little bit about how do we get there, and what are some of the tools and some of the things that we need to be thinking about so that as an IT service provider, we really are providing the information that allows management, whether it's the line of business, whether it's the IT management, to get the insights they need to continue to make better decisions. That's where we really want to move to. Now, we're going to do a simple example here rather than trying to get to everything. So let's come back a second. So as I said, when we talk about analytics, quite often one of the challenges is we don't have sufficient data, whether it's quality, it's quantity, it's data in multiple databases. In the past, technology, mostly the software, obviously has been very expensive, very complex, very time-consuming. And we also need people that understand how to do this. And many of you are aware of the term, I think, data science, and we talk about data scientists. And so there is a lot of work going on of people developing competencies that are going to allow them to help us develop some of these models. And probably most important, that's held many organizations back, is the fact that in most organizations, or in many, the data we have is not really regarded as core to the strategy of the organization, right? And quite often, data is looked at as something after the fact. After the fact, we'll measure to see whether we've accomplished something, but we're not always looking forward to see, are we ready to do it, where do we need to get to, and how are we going to get there? So for that to happen, I'm going to give an example here. So if we just take a lot of the things around operations, something that many of you are involved in, we've got a service desk up at the top. We've got customers calling into the service desk. We may have a knowledge base in place for us to take a look at for what's there. We may have known errors. We've got incidents. We've got requests. We've got changes. We've got events coming from operations. We've got problem management that's trying to look at what's going on. And quite often, trying to do things like problem management or correlate the impact of a change or how well our release is working are very difficult and very time-consuming, and often we really can't measure the impact of some of these. So what we want to be able to do is look at this, and even in an example that I'll say is relatively simple, and I know many of you have more databases than this out there, but if we look at something as simple as having the configuration management system, having knowledge management, having a problem system, all of those, we need to be able to take the data from each of those systems to be able to make some better decisions. And how we would typically do this, the term that many of you have probably heard of, is the term big data. So just to provide a simple explanation, of what we have here. So with big data, what do I care about? It's a set of techniques and technologies that require new forms of integration. And one of the challenges with even a concept like big data is it continues to move and continues to evolve. And even as far as what something was considered to be big data last year might be small data this year. But what we really care about is the fact that we can capture this data, we can manage it, we can process it, but we have to do that all within a reasonable time frame. Right? And therefore, in order to do that, we need something different than the traditional relational database systems that many organizations have in place. Right? So we've got a lot of channels, and I think as many of you know, it's not only the data that's directly under your control, but we also want to take a look at things like social, like what's being said about your organization on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Right? And we can go on to all of the other social networks, including social networks that you may have internally within your organization. What kind of conversations are going on? And what are we saying? What are our customers saying? For some of you, what are the analysts saying? What are user groups saying? So we have all of this that we need to bring together to have some view to understand what's really happening. Now, to do all of this, what we're going to have are some different types of analytics. So I want to just take a couple of minutes to explain some basic types of analytics, and then we're going to spend most of our time on the second, which is the predictive. So today, if we consider the reporting we have in place, which is basically after the fact, right? And most of that management reporting is after the fact, a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later. We have what we would call the descriptive analytics, right? Some quantifiable historical information coming from some databases that we produce some reports and some graphs about. So it tells us what happened, right? But it doesn't tell us anything about what may happen. So where most of us sit today is going to be on this descriptive analytics. The next step is the predictive analytics, right? And that's where can we extract some data, some information, and can we start to predict trends? Can we start to look at behavior patterns? Can we predict by making a change here what some of those changes in behavior will be? Now again, on the predictive, we're still using historical trends, and we are limited a little bit because we can't predict something that hasn't happened yet, but it's the first step to build into the maturity of analytics. And I'm going to spend some time talking more about predictive analytics, which is the first step for many of you on this webinar today. So you understand the overall maturity. We'll talk a little bit about just prescriptive analytics, so you know what that is. All right. So that's how things are going to behave. Now we're going to get predictive. All right. And there we're going to set some models in place. All right. And we're going to describe some conditions. If this happens, what might happen here? So if we reduced our average handle time by X, if we increased our first call resolution, right? If we added this functionality and our customers could do this easier, right? If they could save time doing this, if we combine these two steps and they got this, right? So the prescriptive analytics lets us try to look at what's there, and really now we get to optimizing outcomes because we get to some of the if-thens, and then we can look, if we do this, we think we'll get this. If we do this, we think we'll get this. And then again, allowing us to make better decisions, giving us better insights of the types of changes we might actually want to put in place. And when we're doing this, obviously we're going to be talking about how to be more cost-effective. We'll talk about revenues. We'll talk about margins. We'll talk about employee engagement. We'll talk about customer loyalty. Okay? All the key things that we need to have for an organization to be successful. The third type that we might have is going to be the cognitive. And cognitive analytics are going to come into play when we use machine learning and we use the algorithms to help us not only discover things, but may also help us make better decisions. And these are the kinds of things that you have heard about from IBM with what they call IBM Watson. So things on, let's say, healthcare, where Watson will take the DNA analysis, let's say, on a cancer tumor and will customize particular combinations of drugs. We also have Watson in customer service. We have Watson in knowledge management, helping to understand what kind of articles might be written, helping us do some troubleshooting, diagnostic trees that we could put in place, getting beyond some of the causal issues in problem management and really identifying some root cause items that might be there. Cognitive also will allow us to make a lot of the operations automatic. So if we go back, some of what we think of as science fiction from 20 years ago, if we're going to put a person into space, we're going to put them to sleep for X amount of time, the ability for the machine to literally make a lot of autonomous decisions. And this is also where if we take the Internet of Things, we take the huge amounts of data coming in from there, who's going to analyze that data, make the correlations in that, and provide us some of the insights to help us make better decisions or even make some of those decisions. So that'll be the cognitive. Now, we're going to spend our time today on the one that I think is applicable to most of you, and that's going to be the predictive analytics, right, kind of the first step. And what do we need to really have here? Well, we really need to have some data, which is where we're going to begin, looking at the data that's there. And the first box we see as we go over time is going to be our reporting, our descriptive analytics, right, telling us what happened. And that's what we have today, right? What's going on, what happened, but it's in the past. Now, some organizations, we try to do some monitoring, all right, which is our next box, which is what we're trying to get what's happening in real time. And again, all we're trying to do is narrow the window here between the reporting and the monitoring, but it's still historical, right? We're still responding to something in the past, and we're moving to the monitoring because we want to be able to respond quicker to ensure, let's say, that changes we've made are having the desired outcomes, and if we can monitor it, we can get the information quicker, we can make appropriate tweaks or changes to ensure, or better ensure, we'll achieve the outcomes we want to get. If we move all the way to the right, we have our predictive analytics, and the predictive analytics are there because it's going to help us understand what's going to happen in the future. And if we understand what's going to happen, we then link it back, and we link it back to see is what we expected to happen happening. And so as we move through there, it's going to give us the insights to make better decisions. Where do we need to go? What do we need to do? How is this all going to happen? So that's what we really want to care about and look at is how do we put that in place. So let's spend a little bit of time here, and I want to talk about how do we get to some of this. All right. And as we know, that the challenge we have is that today for most of you, the data is very much siloed. There's incident data that you have, many of you have in the service desk, and that's held in one spot. We have data in networking. We have data in operations. We have data in applications. We have data in hosting. And all of that's in different places. And some of you may have even tried to bring some of that together, but if you have, you know that it's incredibly time-consuming. And in most cases, what we have is manual. Even though many of you have some business analytics and many of you have business intelligence that you actually support for your lines of business, not too often we see people bringing that back into the IT area. Right? And because there's so much data there and no one knows all of it, often we know reports are produced, there's errors in it. And again, often what we get is things that are old. What happened last month? You know, the monthly report comes out the first week of the next month. So we're already 5 weeks into something happening, changes going on in the business. And again, little analysis on most of these, it's just reports. Here's the data. Here's what happened. So again, it's better than nothing, but it's not giving management the kinds of things that it really needs to have to make better decisions. So what we want to do is sort of start to bridge this gap, and how do we move the information that we've got from just something that's operational, how do we move it from there to make it tactical, and then from tactical to move it to more strategic, and ultimately, how does it really help drive our strategy, help drive the plans, drive the changes, drive how we're going to execute? So one of the first things we need to think about is, again, reporting in dashboards, and they really need to be role-specific. right? Again, just as many of you with reporting produce these large report books, it has everything in there, but it's not really broken out by audience. So what we need to do is be able to produce these reports, but they need to be role specific, right? If I'm the CIO, if I'm in charge of infrastructure, if I'm in charge of services management, if I'm in charge of sales, if I'm in charge of manufacturing, we need to have different reporting. And the reporting really needs to be in a dashboard concept, because somebody wants to look at the data, and typically when the data is performing well, everybody's happy. It's what they expected. And if the data isn't, somebody wants to drill down and understand what's really happening. So we need these digital dashboards that allows us to drill down, and understand what's really going on. While we got this real-time reporting, we also really need to move beyond the concept of just these operational metrics, and we really need to be talking about key performance indicators. So let's, again, just come back and redefine key performance indicators. Understanding what your goals are, understanding what your objectives are. What are the key drivers, the key factors that are necessary for us to achieve that goal or objective? So I want to make sure that I have the right key performance indicators, which are measuring those things or measuring some key activities which tell us, are we on track to achieve our goals or not on track to achieve our goals? So I need to take all of these, which today exist in multiple places, in multiple views, and bring these all together to present a view to the right person in their role. I need to have a customer view. I need to have a service provider view. I need to see both of these, and I need to make certain that we really understand what are the key drivers of whatever performance we're looking at. Whether it's sales, it's retention, it's loyalty, it's how quickly we're getting something designed, it's the quality of our testing, how quickly we're getting it through testing. Whatever it is that we're looking at, we then have to really understand what the performance drivers are so that we can measure them and ensure that we're getting the right behaviors out of that, or measure that we're getting the behaviors that we want to change. Now, why do we care about this? Well, I've got some statistics here for you to help you understand why we might really care. Companies that use predictive analytics, I think this is probably the biggest one. There's about a 73% higher sales. Companies that are using this better understand what it is their customers are looking for. Now, whether that's products or whether that's services, it doesn't really make a difference. Business to business, consumer business, again, we're not going to really see a huge difference in there because it's the ability to understand what drives the behaviors of who we're looking at. Another key area is looking at the predictive analytics. All right? Customer defections, customer retention. Now, obviously, we all know customer defections are important because the cost of gaining a new customer is very, very expensive. And often, the cost of retaining that customer is much less than the cost of finding a new customer. But we need to understand what are those things that are causing the defections. What can we do to improve retention? We know quite often, for example, that customers often leave businesses. They leave even something they've been loyal to because they perceive some indifference. They perceive that no one cares. All right? And so if we even take things like voice analytics, some organizations are going to take and run analytics on phone calls so we can understand overall what our customers are saying. We want to do some analytics based on social media. What are customers saying, right? So we need to take multiple places, and we need to have huge amounts of data, and we need to take a look at some of that. One particular company, Exo Communications, here's one where they actually reduced their number of customer defections by 8%. By reducing that 8%, they significantly increased their margins. Right? They significantly increased their profitability. Now again, if we as IT service providers can help show management how we contribute to developing a strategy that retains customers, makes the organization more profitable, then the view of IT will continue to evolve, right, to the point of where we are viewed as very strategic to the success of the organization. So obviously that's something that makes sense not only for us, but makes sense for the business. Now, how do we put some of these models in place? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about this predictive model so you really understand a bit about the steps to help us get there. To build the predictive model, we're going to first pilot. So we're going to need to select some techniques, select some technologies, build a pilot. Now, I expect at this point, many of you are saying, sounds nice, but we don't have money, we don't have a budget, we don't have. So I do have for you at the end of this presentation, I do have a couple of references for you. And included is one spot where there's about, 10, 12, 15 examples of some free software. And we know IT people, especially IT support people, love free software. So I do have some examples of some free software out there that you can use to help build some of your predictive analytics models. So we're going to start, we're going to build the models. All right. Then obviously we're going to need to test the models. And what we do is we have the data, we build the model, and we test to see how well the model is actually going to work. And this is going to be an iterative step for what's there. Right? And we build it, we test it, we validate it, we review it, we correct it, we tweak it, we test it, we validate it, we tweak it. We go back and forth, and an iterative steps over and over again to help do this testing. All right? And in some cases, we may build a couple of models, and we may use a couple of models again to determine which of these models is really going to give us the best information. All right? So again, we validate, we're through it. We're going to then keep bringing it back and testing it till the point where we really can validate what we have, we validate what's working, have is indeed correct for what's there. So we pilot, we test it, we validate it. We then can deploy it. As we deploy it, we'll continue to bring new things into play. All right? And this is where, as we deploy, we really get into the insights about our customers, the insights about the experiences, not necessarily to what we think is important, but what are those experiences that they are going to find important? What are the behaviors that they find important? Where can we help influence some of those behaviors? Right? And then, obviously, we're going to then bring it in, do the reporting, right, and understand how it helps us get there. Right? And since most of the times are going to be dealing with people, ultimately measuring some of that, we need to be thinking about how to calibrate it, how to fine-tune it, and understand this is not going to be a perfect science. It is a science. It's a bit of a science. And actually, it's a bit of an art. Right? So again, we will tweak it, we'll go through it, we'll continue to run this through and run this through. And so we want to be looking at these as we go through all the time for what's there. Now again, why are we doing this? We're doing it because we want to get some value for IT. We want to make sure that we've got one set of data. We want to make sure that whether it's a view from the service desk about what's driving calls, what's driving products, whether it's business relationship management, it's whatever area that you're dealing with, whatever area you're talking about, we want to make sure that's in place. So in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that we really stay focused on this. So this isn't about just producing analytics. This isn't about producing a model. All right? What it is about how do we provide value for the business. And I think the last bullet in this slide is probably the key thing that we care about, which is, do we really understand why things are happening, not just understanding what's happening. Okay? So it's the why that we ultimately care about, not just what happened. So again, we want to move from the what happened, which is the reporting today after the fact, to why are things happening. Right? Why are they happening, which then allows us to take corrective actions much faster, enabling each of the organizations that you support to become more successful. So let's talk a little bit more about some specific areas that we might use when we talk about analytics. So obviously we want to talk about things like product and service quality. So we're going to get information from where? Customer satisfaction surveys, business relationship surveys, forums, product managers meeting with customers, overall quality reports that you might be producing, retention, both of our own staff, retention of our customers. How about the impact of training? Which training programs are really allowing our customers to better utilize products, which results in either better utilization, but more satisfied customers, more engaged customers. For your own teams, which training is allowing people to progress? Which training is allowing your staff to better understand what they do, allowing them to improve their skills? As we said, customer satisfaction, employee engagement. For many of you, workforce optimization. Do I have the right people? Do I know what skills of people I need at what times? When we make changes, what kinds of skills are needed? If we're adding a large number of customers, can you tell me how often and why customers call in the 30, 60, 90 days? Can you tell me which interactions actually build that customer loyalty, which often it does if we provide great service, or which of those interactions don't help build that customer engagement, don't help build that customer loyalty? Which are the types of things where customers experience very positive experiences, and what are those things where they might have negative experiences? How are we using knowledge to help develop the organization? How are we moving information closer to our customers? How are we using the questions that are asked by our customers to improve our products, improve our services? So all types of metrics that we really want to take a look at. Now, again, from a service management viewpoint, what kind of things might we be looking at? The kinds of things we're going to look at are, if I take the overall service knowledge management system, I've got my service portfolio, we've got pipeline information, we've got catalogs, we've got retired services. We've got information in service strategy. We've got financial data on the cost of services. If we're pricing, we've got that information. Do we really understand the demand, how customers use our services, or how our employees use our services? We may have some business case information. We may have policies. We're going to have service models that we're using to help deliver our services that we have there. Let's see what else. We've got availability of our services, capacity management, our service continuity plans. We've got security that have to come into play. We've got release plans, test plans, change plans, technical notes, service reports. We've got continual service improvement, right? So we can keep going on and on and on. And a lot of this data is residing in multiple repositories. And so it's difficult to have it, or often the data we have isn't accurate. So we need to get back to the beginning of, do we have good incident tickets? Do we have good request tickets? Do we have the right categorizations? And then through the analytics, we're going to bring this in and be able to look at what's really going on here to help provide us the insights that we really are going to care about for making all of this work. So let's, again, talk about some of the insights, because ultimately it's not about the data and it's not about the analytics, but it really is about the insights that we want to have here. So some of the insights we might get. So if I just I've just tried to put some examples up here for you that I think may apply and are relevant. So do we understand the demand that we're going to have? Do we understand when customers call? Do we understand why they're calling? Do we look at things from a services viewpoint? So can we look at whether it's the payroll service, the services used by sales, the services used by finance, all right? Do we really understand the demand, which brings back to staffing, and not just the number of people, but the types of skills? Do we understand the competencies our customers have that, again, come back to the types of skills or types of information that we may want to have in place? Do we understand the impact of adding new customers? And again, those new customers may be brand new customers to the business, or what's the impact when your customers have a turnover in their employee staff? What happens to your relationship when new people come in? What kinds of services might you need to go back and repeat, or what services might you need when you have a new customer, a new individual you're dealing with? It may be the same company, but if they have a high turnover or they turn over people, do we understand the impact on your business of that? Right? Do we understand how we can use configuration items, understanding what configuration items are impacted, whether that's a component, whether it's a service, whether it's a system, it's documentation, it's knowledge, it's the number of events you hold. So we want to take a look at all those different kinds of things, and how does that really impact on the incident or request demand for us. We want to look at aging, right? The backlog. And yet, typically backlog for most of you doesn't exist directly with you. It often exists with another group. But what is that impact on our customers? What's that impact on the number of calls when somebody calls to say what's going on? Again, impact on customer satisfaction. Even impact on engagement. If somebody feels overwhelmed because there's too much work sitting in a queue, often that can impact the amount of work that gets done. What's the right amount of information? So if we take something like backlog, we know in some organizations they meter out the backlog and they tend to get better results. Some organizations, someone can say to me, I've got a backlog of 20, 30, 40, 50 issues. And we know that when that happens, they're actually less productive because often they spend their day spinning and spinning and spinning. You know, what's the right number for somebody there that, again, helps productivity, which ultimately it's going to help our customers, right? Do we know which business processes depend on IT services? We know which are really the most critical. Do we know when even small changes, small deviations in that service can have an impact for what's there? Many of you have talked about problems or problem management, right? But do we truly understand the impact of problems? Well, you know, if we knew how many customers use it, if we knew the revenue generated by a business unit, then we could understand what truly was the impact when something didn't work. What truly is the impact when something is running slow? We know that you can get lots of people yelling and calling, but again, what really is the impact on it? Do I really understand what customers use what services? Do I understand what really is the revenue impact, margins? And for many of you, it may change based on your business cycles, based on the business cycles of your customers. Are there times where you can say, I know this is more important or our workload increases, but do we truly understand why it increases, why that workload is there, that will allow us to better optimize our workforce planning for what's there? Do we really understand IT costs? Do we understand the costs where we really understand what services are really the best services for you to deliver, and perhaps what services are better services or services that could be better delivered by another organization? Right? Do we truly understand our service level performance and how it impacts business performance? Right? Do we understand the impact of increases, decreases, and what's the impact not only on IT, but what's the impact on whoever's using those services, and ultimately what's the impact on the business? So how do all of those come into play? A few more things that we might look at moving up a level. How about, do we really understand what your customers think are important? So in service management through IDLE, obviously we talk about utility and warranty, fit for purpose, fit for use. We talk about what? Enhancing performance. We talk about removing constraints. So if we could enhance performance, what behaviors would that result in for our customers? Again, whether it's employees or our external customers, how is it going to help them? If I look at the availability, the capacity, the continuity, what's the impact of security, right, when we look at those? And we know already that different lines of business, different customers will value different things, but do we really know which of them that they really value? Assuming we've got some configuration management, we've got some relationships, can we really understand what impacts our ability to deliver services? Do we really understand when there's a failure? What really took the most time to restore? Can we bring that information back to service design, right? Can service design then help us better understand how to have something that's more reliable, that's more resilient, right? And yes, we have what we have today because that's what the customers paid for. But when we start talking about continual improvement, all right, it's easy for every one of us to come up with a large list of things, but now I want to provide better insight on that continual service improvement register. Why do we choose the particular things that we're choosing? Right. Can I really look at increases and decreases in my key performance indicators? Also, over time, those key performance indicators need to change. If we're a relatively immature organization, all right, then our key performance indicators when we're relatively immature, when we're at a maturity of, let's say, a 2 or a 3, or we're at a maturity of 4, we are going to typically have different key performance indicators. So we need to make sure we've got the right ones, but again, as we make changes, as we get insights, as we make corrections, improvements, some of those key performance indicators will change. So do we have the right ones as we're going through there? All right? Do we understand all of the reasons why we have success? Can we correlate some of those in there? The impact of staffing changes, the impact of self-service, the impact of increasing the skill level, the competency level at your first level. What's the impact on some of your development teams if you can reduce the number of interruptions that are coming from a desk, right? Those interruptions should significantly reduce the amount of time it gets the project out, which should be linked to some strategic initiative. The quality should be higher, right? All of those interruptions increase the amount of time for something to get done and tend to decrease the quality. So again, how do we look at that and help show what the impact of investing in one area and what's the impact of something else? How do I look at the impact in my customer changes, right? If we put a change in place, we're putting it in place for a particular reason. How do we know that this process change achieved the desired outcomes? Did we get the productivity? Did we get the employee engagement? So those are some of the kinds of things I want to take a look at. Want to know, again, the knowledge, is it being used the way we expected, or I'd at least like to know how it's being used, and then how can we modify it to get it to be more valuable for the organization. I want to know what services, again, the real root cause, because I want to be able to increase the availability of services. So all things that we really are going to care about. Now, in order to do all of this, however, kind of jumping back, is we can't just start and say, I want to see what's happening. All right, so we clearly need to understand what is the goal. All right? So define and document what are the outcomes we expect, and obviously we need to define what success is. We need to know where is the data coming from. Right? What data is anonymous? What data is authenticated? What's the accuracy of the data? What's the integrity of the data? We need some kind of a universal format. And obviously we need to map, clean up the data, get it in there so we can have all the analytics in place that we want to have. And so we talked before at the beginning about the fact that we didn't have the data, and today we do have better data. We've got better quality, we've got better timeliness. And in fact, if nothing else, Internet of Things is really facilitating this uniformity of data because everybody wants to take a look at this data, huge amounts of data. So we've got that. The technology is much more available than it was even 2 years ago, right? So it's quite widely available. Competencies are more, I'll say, more available, both internal and external, and we see a lot more people, a lot more conversation over the last 4 years, 5 years, where we really are starting to mature on the concept of data science and what's a data scientist, how do we do this analytics, all right? And culture-wise, senior management, your boards are all starting to understand that the fact that the data is a strategic asset of the organization, right? And I think many organizations would say that it's a strategic asset. However, what we've got to do is not just call it a strategic asset, but we have to figure out how do we use that data to develop the strategic insights that allow the organization to become more successful. Now, just one thing to think about. Actually, I'm going to jump ahead first, and then we'll come back to that slide. Just sort of two things to end up before we move to questions. So just a simple example of, correlation and causation. So the chart here of just because sales are up and shaved heads are up, is that a reason that everybody should do that? So we need to have the right people looking at what we have and make sure that we really do have the right correlations and we've got the right people with the right skills. Another thing we need to be careful of is as we're doing this, while the tools are agnostic, let me just come back. Tools must be used responsibly. And I have also provided for you an article about just because you can run analytics, should you, that we have some responsibilities. We've got social responsibilities in addition to regulatory. We've got compliance, and we've got legal issues about data. So we need to make sure that what we're doing is responsible, all right? And we need to make sure that just because we can measure something is not necessarily a reason that we want to do it. And so when we start talking about the analytics, we start talking about data, we talk about all the things that we can collect, it's important to remember that one of the key things that you need to have in place are some policies around the ethics of what's the data you're collecting and how it is that you might use it. As I said, there's some information for you here on some resources. These are in the file that you can download, so those will be available for you later. And I've also provided for your information an example of predictive analytics methodology with the resources. Again, so you can just get a picture of how to put that model together. And with that, Megan, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Thanks, John. Before we begin today's Q&A, please fill out the feedback form that has opened on your computer. Oh, wait, maybe it didn't open. 1 second. There it is. Now it's open on your computer. To complete the form, please press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in our surveys really does help us better serve you. And now, on to the question and answer portion of our event. Our first question comes from Rob. John, in your experience, what is the most impactful internal customer satisfaction style of survey that will help generate some of this data we're looking for?
Wow. I hate to use it depends, but I think understanding a bit about the culture in your organization is important. I think there's the simplest view. I can put a smiley face or a sad face up there, or I can do a scale. Personally, I want to stay away from 10-point scales because I think that's way too many. Science, psychometrics tells us typically odd number scales are good, but there's obviously a whole science about scales and anchoring and all of that. I think the key thing for me is make sure you're asking the right questions. And where I'll focus there is we all use or many of you obviously in this webinar use some kind of an event survey, and I think it's doing yourself and the organization a disservice if you take a satisfaction survey coming from the service desk and portray it as overall customer satisfaction. That survey is measuring the satisfaction with that incident, with that person. It isn't measuring anything about the services you offer, the relationship, how much I trust you, or anything else. So I think having the right questions, and obviously that means, I'll say, multiple forms. So it's surveys, it's in-face, it's forums. I think we've got to have, I'd rather use the word customer feedback, and I need multiple channels of feedback for what's there. And in order to do it, what we collect has to be meaningful. So collect it, tell them what they said, take actions based on what they said, and I think you'll get more information. But minimally, you need not only the measures from the service desk, but you also need what I'll call a periodic or relationship survey, and understand how satisfied are they with the services and the relationships that's going on. Because again, the service desk is only getting it when it's a question, and we don't know how satisfied, how high on the scale somebody is who's totally satisfied with the services, who may never call you.
Sure, thanks. All right, our next question comes from Jose, and his question is that today, as always, most companies lack information about the process. So how do you see in the future this lack of information being eliminated? How could predictive analytics help us in that regard?
Well, I think the first thing is you need to define the key components of what's a process, and part of that has to be some overall success measures of the process. So if we just take a process, there should be a policy. And by the way, a policy can be a paragraph or two. It's not a book. So simple, why are we doing it? And then we should have goals for it. And then the metrics of telling us, have we achieved that goal? Is the process effective? Is it efficient? I think that's the first part. So collecting the data, but again, I want to be careful. I want to collect the right data. And if I don't use it, I'm not collecting it for the sake of collecting it. I'm collecting data that I use, and so I think that's the first thing. So we've got to have some good basic process in place. I don't need a huge number of metrics, but obviously I need to have the right ones, and I just need to understand the validity, the accuracy, the integrity of them. I can make decisions knowing it's only 50% accurate. It just leads to the risk of what conclusions I might draw by using only that data.
All right. Our next question then is from Gretchen, and she'd like to know if you have any tips for determining KPIs for a help desk.
Wow. My first tip would be don't blanketly use the KPIs that somebody's put in a book, in a webinar, or anyplace else. The things that are published and talked about should come with a caveat that here are examples of KPIs that many organizations have. Here are some examples of common KPIs, but most important is I've got to start with what's your goal, what's your strategy, your plan. Based on your goal, your objectives, and your plan, then we can figure out what your KPIs are. So you've got to be appropriate to you. The other one is often when we put things out, we give examples of KPIs for rather immature organizations all the way up through examples of KPIs for very mature organizations. They don't all apply based on your maturity. They don't all apply based on your goals. And so I think coming back to that, and just not to necessarily give a plug, but HDI does have a virtual class and an instructor-led class on support center metrics, and in that class we actually spend about an hour talking about key performance indicators, what are they, and some examples for helping you determine how to pick a key performance indicator for your organization.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from John, for another John. It's often challenging to get analytics business cases approved without compliance requirements. Do you have some tips on how to make this a management priority?
Wow. How would I make it a management priority? What I would do would be I would figure out how those analytics, I would somehow link them to some strategic objective that somebody in that management team cared about. And if I can show how the analytics will provide insight on some strategic goal or objective for the organization, I think you'll find a complete 180 in terms of their support. I think often the challenge we have with IT people, and even service desk people more sometimes, is we're not always presenting it and interpreting of all the things we could do for it. So it may be interpreted as how it helps IT or how it helps the service desk. Show me how it can help the business achieve a strategic objective, or for one of those strategic players, how that can help them achieve one of their strategic goals and objectives. And I think you'll find a different set of questions or a different set of objections.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. Are there any areas where analytics are more relevant than others? So, for example, operations, design, or transition?
No, I think they're relevant in all areas. Again, I would bring it back to strategic goals and objectives for the organization. Which one of those areas are most important if we improve them? Can we show the link? Can we help the business be successful? And again, I kind of oversimplify it, but whether it's revenue, it's funding, it's margins, it's customer stat, customer loyalty, employee engagement. Every organization has those kinds of goals and objectives. So I would be looking at how we can help enhance, how we can provide insights on one or two of those that the organization has really deemed most important to improve, and focus on that to show the value of how those insights can, again, continue to help us be more successful.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John, for your insights and your presentation today. Before we close up here, I just wanted to invite you to join us for our next webinar happening on Tuesday, January 19th. That webinar will be hosted by Monica Cornetti, and it is entitled Game On, Using Gamification to Motivate and Engage. Thank you once again for attending today's webinar, The Analytics Era, a look at the future of metrics, brought to you by HDI. For more information related to today's webinar, please visit any of the resource links. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. On behalf of our speaker, John Custy, thanks for your time and have a great day. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, The Analytics Era, a look at the future of metrics. I'm Megan Selva, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we get started. If you experience any difficulty with the webinar itself, you can get help by clicking on the yellow question mark icon at the bottom of your screen. You can participate